Number 1. The sun gun. The ocean beneath you is boiling, not warming, not steaming at the edges, boiling. The surface of the North Atlantic is churning white from horizon to horizon, and the air above it is superheated plasma. You cannot breathe it. Your lungs would fill with scalded vapor before you hit the water. The ships around you are not sinking, they are evaporating, and the thing doing this is 100 miles above your head. This was not science fiction. In 1929, German physicist Hermann Oberth published a paper describing an orbital mirror 1 mile in diameter, a concave reflector positioned in geostationary orbit, capable of focusing sunlight to a single point on Earth's surface. He called it a space mirror. The U.S. Army, after capturing his documents in 1945, called it the sun gun. They ran their own feasibility analysis. Their conclusion was classified for 11 years. The physics worked. That is the first thing to understand. Oberth was not a crank. He was the man who taught Wernher von Braun rocketry. His calculations on orbital mechanics were correct. A sufficiently large parabolic reflector in orbit would focus solar energy to a spot approximately 1 kilometer wide on the surface below. At the focal point, temperatures would exceed 3 degrees Celsius. That is hotter than the surface of Venus. Concrete does not melt at that temperature. It sublimates, it becomes gas. The concept was revived inside the Nazi weapons program in the early 1940s. SS engineers under the Heeresversuchsanstalt program estimated a construction timeline of 50 to 100 years. That estimate was not a dismissal, it was a production schedule. The sun gun's targeting flexibility was its most terrifying feature. It could not be intercepted. It operated at the speed of light. There was no warning, no trajectory to track, no warhead to detonate prematurely. The weapon simply existed in orbit, invisible against the sun, and then a city was gone, a harbor, a fleet, a dam holding back a river that fed a continent. When the U.S. Army's report was finally declassified in 1956, the analysts were not concerned about whether such a weapon was possible. They were concerned about whether the Soviets had continued the research. They had. Pravda reported in 1946 that Soviet scientists were studying the concept. The reference was buried on page 11 of the edition. Nobody was supposed to notice. Here is the part that reaches into your life in 2026. The U.S. Air Force's Airborne Laser Program, tested from 2010 to 2014, was a directed energy weapon system mounted on a modified Boeing 747. It used a chemical oxygen iodine laser to destroy ballistic missiles in boost phase. The program was canceled, officially for cost reasons. The technology was transferred to classified programs. The Pentagon's current high-energy laser weapons program, Helios, is operational on U.S. Navy destroyers right now. The HEL-MD truck-mounted laser system can engage drone swarms. The Space Force's X-37B orbital vehicle has been in orbit for over 7 years on missions whose purpose has never been publicly disclosed. Oberth published his paper in 1929. You are reading this 97 years later. The line between his math and what is currently in orbit above you is unbroken. The sun gun was never built, but every directed energy weapon program on Earth traces its theoretical lineage to one physicist in Weimar, Germany who looked up at the sun and asked the wrong question. And the next invention on this list did not aim at the ocean. It aimed at New York. Number 2. The Silbervogel, an aircraft that skips off the atmosphere like a stone on water and drops a bomb on Manhattan, is not a concept that belongs in 1941. It belongs in the threat assessments of 2026. Eugen Sanger built it anyway. The Silbervogel, the Silver Bird, was Sanger's antipodal rocket bomber. The design brief was specific. Take off from a rail accelerator in Germany, reach an altitude of 260 kilometers, skip off the upper atmosphere in a series of decreasing bounces, each one covering thousands of miles, deliver a 2-kilogram bomb on a target anywhere on Earth, and land in Japanese-controlled territory in the Pacific. Total flight time, approximately 90 minutes. The physics are called aerodynamic skip glide. When a blunt body enters the upper atmosphere at hypersonic speed, it compresses a cushion of air so dense the vehicle rides it back out to space rather than descending. Sanger and his mathematician wife Irene Brett calculated the trajectory with enough precision that the post-war U.S. Air Force used their equations directly. Their 1944 technical report, A Rocket Drive for Long-Range Bombers, was captured in its entirety. The Americans flew it back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and immediately stamped it classified. Joseph Stalin sent his son Yakov's brother-in-law, aviation engineer Grigori Tukati, on a mission into post-war Germany with explicit orders to find Sanger and Brett and bring them to Moscow. Tukati's own memoirs, published after his defection to Britain in 1948, describe the operation in detail. Stalin wanted the Silver Bird badly enough to authorize kidnapping a German scientist in the American occupation zone. The mission failed only because Sanger had already been spirited away to France. The Silbervogel never flew. The German war economy could not produce the rocket engine with a 100-ton thrust rating that the design required. But the skip-glide trajectory concept did not disappear. The X-20 Dinosaur program, canceled by the US in 1963, used Sanger's skip-glide equations. The Space Shuttle's re-entry profile was a direct refinement of antipodal bomber math. And in 2026, Russia's Avangard hypersonic glide vehicle, China's DFZF, and the U.S. Air Force's AGM-183 ARRW are all skip-glide weapons. They maneuver at Mach 20. They are functionally uninterceptable by current missile defense systems. They exist because a German engineer and his wife spent the years 1936 to 1944 doing the math that no one wanted to believe. The Silbervogel was forbidden not because it failed. It was forbidden because it worked on paper, and paper was enough. But if a weapon designed in 1941 became the ancestor of today's uninterceptable hypersonic missiles, consider what happens when the weapon was designed in 1944, built in a workshop, and tested in secret, and it was a stealth aircraft. Number 3. The Horten SO-229. In 1928, engineers at Northrop Grumman, the company that built the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, the most sophisticated aircraft in the world, completed a classified analysis. They had built a full-scale replica of a 70-year-old German aircraft and tested it in a radar reflection chamber. The results were not supposed to be surprising. They were. The Horten SO-229 was a flying wing jet aircraft. No fuselage, no tail. 2 Junkers Jumo 4 jet engines buried in the center section, exhausting through the trailing edge. Designed by brothers Reimar and Walter Horten beginning in 1943, the aircraft first flew in December 1944. It could reach 975 kilometers per hour. That made it faster than any Allied aircraft in the sky. But the radar cross-section test in 1928 revealed something the Northrop engineers described in their published report as a genuine surprise. The SO-229's charcoal mixed wood construction absorbed radar waves. The flying wing planform eliminated the perpendicular surfaces that reflect radar most strongly. The buried engines removed the massive radar return of conventional engine inlets. Northrop Grumman's analysis concluded that at certain frequencies and angles, the SO-229 had a radar cross-section 20 to 40% smaller than contemporary conventional aircraft. Their exact words in the publicly released summary: "This was the first stealth aircraft." The British chain-home radar system, the network that won the Battle of Britain, operated at frequencies between 20 and 30 megahertz, the frequency range where the SO-229's stealth properties were most pronounced. Northrop's simulation showed that a SO-229 approaching the British coast would have been detected by chain-home at approximately 80% of the range at which a conventional aircraft was detected. An attacking formation of SO-229S would have appeared on British radar screens 8 minutes later than a conventional formation. 8 minutes was the minimum scramble time for RAF interceptors. The window for interception would have been effectively zero. The U.S. Army Air Forces had studied the captured prototype at Freeman Field, Indiana in 1945. They understood immediately what they had. Every captured document related to the SO-229 was classified. The Horten brothers, living in post-war West Germany, were placed under quiet observation by U.S. intelligence. Reimar Horten emigrated to Argentina in 1948. He continued aircraft design there for the rest of his life, always under the understanding that certain conversations were not permitted. The B-2 Spirit entered service in 1997. It is a flying wing with no fuselage and no tail. It is constructed partly of radar-absorbing composite materials. It costs $1 billion per aircraft. 52 years before it flew, 2 brothers in Germany built one out of wood. That aircraft sits in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Chantilly, Virginia. If you visit, you can look at it. The information plaque does not mention the 28 Northrop Grumman study. If the SO-229 shows what was possible with metal and wood in 1944, what was being built in the programs that left no documentation at all? Number 4. Die Glock. You are a Polish prisoner assigned to a facility in Lower Silesia in late 1944. You do not know where you are. You know only that the underground complex you work in is called Der Riese, the Giant, and that the device in the central chamber is unlike anything in any factory or laboratory you have ever seen. It is approximately 9 feet tall. It resembles a bell. It is made of some ceramic or metallite material you cannot identify. When it operates, it emits a faint violet light and a buzzing hum that you feel more than hear. The scientists operating it are SS, not Wehrmacht, not Luftwaffe, SS. And every 6 months, the scientific staff rotates. You understand, without being told directly, what rotation means. The previous team did not leave by bus. Die Glocke, the bell, is the most contested object in the history of Nazi secret weapons. The evidence for its existence is thin and comes primarily through a single source, Polish intelligence journalist Igor Witkowski, who claimed to have viewed classified Polish government documents in 1997 before they were resealed. British author Nick Cook's subsequent investigation, published in The Hunt for Zero Point in 21, added additional testimony from a source Cook identified only as a senior European aerospace executive who had independently accessed post-war intelligence files. What makes Die Glocke impossible to dismiss entirely is not the device itself, it is the man connected to it. SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler was the most powerful figure in Nazi secret weapons programs. He ran the V2 program. He ran the underground factory at Mittelwerk where slave labor built the rockets. He controlled the network of underground research facilities across Germany and occupied territories. In April 1945, Kammler disappeared. His personal staff, his files, his aircraft, everything associated with him was gone. No body was found, no grave, no confirmed post-war sighting. In the chaos of 1945, dozens of senior Nazis vanished into rat lines or Allied capture programs, and their fates were eventually documented. Kammler's was not. The official explanation is that he died by suicide in early May 1945. The evidence for this is a single second-hand testimony with no corroborating documentation. Joseph Farrell, Henry Stevens, and other researchers who have studied the Kammler disappearance converge on one hypothesis. Kammler traded the bell, or the research associated with it, for his own extraction. That the bell represented something so far outside conventional physics that one or more Allied powers accepted the exchange. The mainstream scientific community holds that Die Glocke almost certainly did not exist as described, that the testimony is contaminated by post-war mythology, and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence which has not been produced. That is a fair position. What is not a fair position is that Kammler's disappearance is fully explained. It is not. He ran the most classified programs in the Nazi state and he vanished at the exact moment those programs would have become the most valuable assets on Earth. In 2026, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP, was revealed through congressional testimony to have studied, among other things, the physics of gravitational manipulation and exotic propulsion. The program's existence was denied for 3 years before confirmation. Whatever Kammler knew, someone learned it. Whether from Kammler directly or from what he left behind, the questions he was working on did not die in 1945. And if Die Glocke's technology was traded away in silence, then the next invention reveals something worse. A weapon that was already built, already stockpiled, already aimed, and the only thing that stopped it was a bluff. Number 5. The Tabun Decision. Germany possessed 12 tons of Tabun nerve agent by 1944. That number is not a rumor. It is documented in post-war Allied chemical weapons surveys. 12,000 tons. Tabun is a nerve agent that kills at an exposure of approximately 400 milligrams per cubic meter of air. A single artillery shell containing 15 kilograms of Tabun, when detonated in an open area, produces lethal concentrations across roughly 4 square meters of ground. Germany had delivery systems, artillery shells, aerial bombs, the Nebelwerfer rocket launcher, all tested, all calibrated, all stockpiled at Rogpamer and other facilities. The ratio staggers the mind. 12,000 tons of Tabun against Normandy beach defenses on June 6, 1944 would not have slowed the Allied advance. It would have prevented it entirely. The beaches would have been uninhabitable for weeks. The ships offshore would have been in range of aerial delivery. Operation Overlord, the largest seaborne invasion in history, would have ended in a mass casualty event with no historical parallel in the 20th century. Hitler did not use it. The official explanation, drawn from post-war interrogations of Albert Speer, Field Marshal Keitel, and others, is that Hitler believed the Allies possessed equivalent nerve agents and would retaliate in kind. He had personal psychological trauma from a gas attack in WW1. He forbade chemical weapons deployment on the Western Front. But here is the fact that was only confirmed after the war. The Allies had no nerve agents, none. The British and Americans possessed phosgene and mustard gas, WW1-era agents, but had no knowledge that taboon even existed until 1945. The entire deterrence that prevented the use of the most effective weapon in the German arsenal was built on a lie that happened to be believed by the one man who needed to believe it. The Post-War Chemical Weapons Convention, signed in 1993 and ratified by 193 countries including every major military power, is the most universally adhered to weapons treaty in existence. It endures because every signatory understands that the deterrence logic of 1944 still applies. If you use chemical weapons, the world assumes the response will be in kind, whether or not that response actually exists. The bluff that saved D-Day became the structural logic of the entire post-war chemical weapons regime. The 12,000 tons of taboon were buried in the Baltic Sea after the war. In 2026, Baltic fishermen still occasionally pull up corroded artillery shells. The German Federal Environment Agency estimates 65 tons of chemical munitions lie on the Baltic seabed. They are not inert, they are corroding. And if a weapon that was stockpiled, aimed, and ready was stopped by a psychological accident, then the next invention was stopped by something more deliberate. Number 6. The Foo Fighters and the disc programs. In the winter of 1944, Allied bomber crews over Germany began reporting something that Air Force intelligence could not explain and would not acknowledge. Luminous spherical or disc-shaped objects that kept pace with aircraft flying at 300 miles per hour, performed turns that no known aircraft could execute, and vanished without trace. The pilots called them Foo Fighters. The Air Force opened a classified file. That file has never been fully released. The German engineering behind at least some Foo Fighter sightings became clear only after the war. In 1944, Czech-German engineer Georg Klein gave a deposition to U.S. intelligence stating that he had personally witnessed the flight test of a circular aircraft at the Prague-Kabli airfield on February 14, 1945. Klein identified the project as the work of engineers Schriever, Habermohl, Mita, and the Italian scientist Bellanzo. He described a vehicle approximately 50 meters in diameter that achieved low-altitude flight using rotating turbine rings around a fixed cockpit, a design principle that eliminated the torque problems that destabilized all conventional VTOL aircraft of the era. A second post-war source, SS General Wilhelm Voss, gave testimony to U.S. intelligence in 1945, stating that Mita's program was operational and that at least one prototype had been evacuated from Prague before the Soviet advance. Voss's testimony was classified. Klein's deposition was classified. Both were declassified in fragments during the 1990s under FOIA requests, enough to confirm the testimony existed, but not enough to confirm what it described. In 1954, Canadian aviation engineer John Frost at Avro Canada began development of the Avro Car, a circular VTOL aircraft funded by the U.S. Air Force and Army. The program was classified until 1960. When declassified, the public record showed funding of $10 million. Documents released later under FOIA showed a parallel classified program alongside the public one. The unclassified Avro Car was a failure. It couldn't exceed 3 feet of altitude or 35 miles per hour. The classified program's results were not included in the FOIA release. The CIA's declassified CREST database contains references to circular aircraft testing programs through the late 1950s. The specific technical details in those references were redacted. The Lockheed Skunk Works classified programs from the same period included, according to sources interviewed by aviation journalist Janes, at least one disc-shaped vehicle. The sources are named, their quotes are documented. The vehicle is not. What exists in the unclassified record is this. Allied pilots saw something over Germany in 1944 that matched no known aircraft. German engineers described building circular aircraft in 1945. The U.S. immediately classified everything related to both. And in 24, the U.S. Navy filmed a disc-shaped object off the coast of San Diego performing maneuvers consistent with what Allied pilots described over Germany 60 years earlier. That footage was released in 2017. The official designation for the object is UAP. The investigation into its origin is ongoing and classified. If what flew over Germany in 1944 points to the unresolved aerial questions of 2026, then the next invention points to something cruder and more honest. A weapon so enormous it collapsed under its own ambition. Number 7. The Landkreiser Rada. The largest tank ever seriously designed for production was not a tank, it was a land battleship, and the ratio between what it was and what the word tank means is so extreme the brain initially refuses to process it. The Landkreiser P-1000 Rada, the one-tune rat, was designed by Krupp engineer Edward Grotte in 1942 and approved for preliminary development by Hitler personally. Its dimensions: 35 meters long, 14 meters wide, 11 meters tall. Primary armament: two 280 mm battleship guns in a single turret. The guns from a Scharnhorst-class heavy cruiser, capable of firing a 330 kilogram shell 40 kilometers. Secondary armament: 820 mm anti-aircraft cannons, two 128 mm anti-aircraft guns, and multiple machine gun positions. Crew: 20 to 40 men. Engine: two MAN V12 Z32/44 marine diesel engines or two Daimler-Benz MB 501 engines from E-boats, producing a total of 16 horsepower. Maximum road speed: approximately 40 kilometers per hour. No existing bridge in Germany or occupied Europe could support 1 tons. No railway system could transport it. Its track ground pressure would have destroyed any paved road. It would have required demolition of buildings to move through any urban area. The Wehrmacht calculated that moving the Rada from its theoretical factory to any combat theater would require rebuilding the entire European road and bridge infrastructure along the route. Albert Speer canceled the program in 1943. He described it in his memoirs as a monument to technical megalomania. But here is what the cancellation of the Rada actually changed. German armor doctrine, confronting the impossibility of the supertank concept, shifted entirely toward the Panther and Tiger programs. Fast, heavily armored vehicles operating in combined arms formations rather than single dominant landships. The Rada's cancellation accelerated the development of the concentrated armor doctrine that Soviet T-34 production eventually overwhelmed through sheer numbers. The Soviet answer to the Rada was not a bigger tank, it was 30,000 medium ones. In 2026, the U.S. Army's M1A2 Abrams weighs 62 tons. The Russian T-14 Armata weighs 55 tons. No serious tank program anywhere on Earth has exceeded 70 tons since the 1950s, because every major military absorbed the lesson that the Rada's cancellation taught. Scale in armor is a weapon against yourself. The Rada was a dead end. But the invention that came from its wreckage, the realization that quantity beats singular enormity, is still the fundamental doctrine of armored warfare today. If the Rate taught the world that a weapon can be too large to be dangerous, the next invention taught the opposite, that a weapon can be so small, so elegant, so destructively efficient, that the entire world arms itself with it for the next 80 years. Number 8. The Sturmgewehr and the laundered legacy. In 1944, Mauser engineer Wilhelm Stahle completed the CHG-45M, Sturmgewehr 45, using a roller-delayed blowback mechanism so mechanically elegant and so inexpensive to manufacture that German factories could produce it for approximately 40 Reichsmarks per unit. That was roughly a quarter of the cost of the MP-40 submachine gun. The weapon was chambered in an intermediate cartridge, the 7.92 by 33 mm Kurz, that traveled fast enough to be lethal at 400 meters but produced half the recoil of the standard rifle round. A trained soldier could deliver accurate automatic fire at the range of a rifle with the controllability of a submachine gun. The war ended before the CHG-45 reached mass production. American, British, and Soviet soldiers collected them as trophies and curiosities. The Americans shipped the production tooling, blueprints, and key Mauser engineers to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. A second set of blueprints was also shipped through channels that were not Aberdeen Proving Ground to an engineer in Spain named Theodor Loeffler, who had worked on the project. In 1949, under license from CETME, the Centro de Estudios Técnicos de Materiales Especiales in Madrid, a rifle was produced based on the CHG-45's roller-delayed blowback principle. By 1956, the Bundeswehr had adopted a refinement of that rifle as its standard service weapon. By 1959, Heckler & Koch had licensed the design and began producing it as the G3. The G3 was adopted by over 40 countries. Heckler & Koch then scaled the same mechanism down for the HK-33, the MP5, and eventually the HK-416, the rifle used by SEAL Team 6. The entire family of weapons used by Special Operations Forces across the Western world for the last 40 years descends through a direct mechanical lineage from a German workshop in 1944. The present-day HK-416 costs approximately $3,000 per unit. It is chambered in 56 by 45 mm NATO, an intermediate cartridge traveling fast enough to be lethal at 400 meters with half the recoil of a full rifle round. The description is identical to the weapon Stala built in 1944. What changed was the name, the manufacturer, and the price. This is the mechanism by which forbidden inventions survive, not suppression but laundering. The idea passes through a neutral country, through a licensing agreement, through a corporate structure, and reappears with a new name. The lineage is real and documented, but the documentation exists in production records and patent registries that no one assembles into a continuous history. Every German rifle designed since 1945 that became dominant in the Western world shares the same mechanical ancestor. The weapon that the Allies captured and classified in 1945 is the weapon that your military, and the military of nearly every Western ally, carries today. They just changed the label. If the assault rifle's suppressed lineage shows how technology survives by disappearing into commerce, the final chapter of this story shows what it means when the lineage is not commercial but strategic, when the children of these inventions are not guns in soldiers' hands but vectors aimed at every city on Earth. Number 9. The V3 and Gerald Bull's assassination. In 1944, the village of Mimoyekis in northern France contained a facility the Allied High Command classified as more dangerous than any V1 or V2 installation in occupied Europe. Inside a chalk hillside, German engineers had cut 50 smoothbore barrels into the rock at a 55-degree angle, each barrel 150 meters long, each fitted with a series of lateral propellant chambers along its length, secondary charge chambers that would fire in precise sequence as the projectile passed, adding velocity at each stage. The weapon was designated the Hochdruckpumpe, the high-pressure pump. The Allies called it the V3. The design principle was this: a single propellant charge cannot accelerate a projectile beyond the velocity at which the expanding gas can no longer push. But if you fire additional charges laterally into the barrel as the shell passes, each one timed to coincide exactly with the projectile's arrival, the muzzle velocity can be multiplied. At Mimoyekis, the calculated muzzle velocity was 1/500 meters per second. The range, 165 kilometers. The target, central London. The planned rate of fire, once all 50 barrels were operational, 600 shells per hour, 24 hours a day. RAF Bomber Command struck Mimoyekis on July 6, 1944, with Tallboy deep penetration bombs. They destroyed the chalk tunnels. The V3 never fired a shell in anger. The concept did not die. It went quiet for 40 years. In 1988, Canadian ballistics engineer Gerald Bull was the world's leading expert on long-range supergun artillery. He had worked for the U.S. government in the 1960s on Project HARP, the High-Altitude Research Project, testing extended-range gun technology in Barbados. When that funding dried up, Bull went private. In the late 1980s, he accepted a contract from Saddam Hussein's Iraq to design a supergun called Project Babylon. The largest barrel, Big Babylon, would have had a bore of 1 meter and a barrel length of 156 meters, nearly identical to the Hochdruckpumpe, and a projected range of 1 kilometers. Its payload could have included chemical, biological, or conventional warheads. It could have reached Israel, Saudi Arabia, or Iran from a fixed installation inside Iraq. On March 22, 1990, Gerald Bull was shot 5 times in the head and neck outside his apartment in Brussels. No one claimed responsibility. The investigation identified no perpetrator. Mossad, MI6, the CIA, and Iranian intelligence were all named as suspects in various subsequent analyses. No arrests were ever made. The partially assembled components of Project Babylon were seized by British customs agents days after Bull's death. The supergun barrels had been shipped from Sheffield, England, disguised as oil pipeline components. The company that manufactured them, Sheffield Forgemasters, stated it had not been informed of their intended purpose. The Board of Trade inquiry that followed was quietly shelved after 18 months. Its full findings have never been published. In 2026, North Korea's KN-25 multiple launch rocket system can reach targets 380 kilometers away. The same multi-charge staging principle that the Germans tested at Mimoyekis in 1944 appears in the theoretical designs of next-generation extended-range artillery programs at DARPA. The physics have not changed. The barrels are just pointed in different directions now. Gerald Bull is buried in Ottawa. The man who resurrected the V3 died the same way the V3 died, from above, without warning, before the weapon could fire. Number 10. What they buried and what they kept. There is a version of this story that ends with the observation that these weapons were stopped, that the right side won, that the forbidding of these inventions was the correct moral outcome. That version is comfortable and it is incomplete. The Sun Gun's directed energy mathematics are currently operating at classified power levels aboard platforms the Pentagon will not describe in detail. The Silbervogel's skip-glide trajectory is the flight profile of the hypersonic weapons currently aimed at every major city on Earth, flying too fast and too low for any existing missile defense system to intercept. The Horton-Ho 229's radar-absorbing flying wing geometry is the precise design principle of the B-2 Spirit, the F-22, and every stealth platform in the current US, Russian, and Chinese inventories. The SATE-G45's mechanical heart beats inside the service rifles of almost every military in the Western world. The V3's multi-charge staging principle is an active research vector in long-range artillery development programs in at least 4 countries. What was forbidden was not the physics. Physics cannot be forbidden. What was forbidden was the attribution. The weapons were buried, and then the weapons were rebuilt, and then the weapons were deployed, but the genealogy was removed. The lineage was laundered through Spain and Canada and post-war corporate structures and classified programs until the inheritance was invisible. This is the actual history of military technology in the second half of the 20th century. Not a story of invention, but a story of succession. The victors inherited the blueprints and the engineers and the test data and the production tooling. They built new weapons out of old equations and gave them new names. And the official history was written as though those names were origins. The German scientists who designed these weapons were given new identities under Operation Paperclip and Operation Surgeon and Operation Matchbox. Wernher von Braun, who ran the slave labor factory at Mittelwerk where 20 concentration camp prisoners died building V-2 rockets, became the director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and the architect of the Saturn V that put Americans on the moon. His file was altered before his immigration to remove references to his SS rank and his knowledge of conditions at Mittelwerk. The alteration was official U.S. government policy. What does it mean that we live in a world shaped by forbidden inventions? It means that the weapons we are most afraid of were not invented by our enemies, they were inherited from them. And the moral weight of that inheritance has never been fully assigned, because assigning it would require acknowledging the genealogy, and acknowledging the genealogy would require acknowledging what was buried and why and by whom. The Sun Gun was forbidden. The directed energy weapons program is not. The Silbervogel was forbidden. The Avangard is not. The Ho 229 was forbidden. The B-2 is not. The SATE-G45 was forbidden. The HK 416 is not. What changed between forbidden and permitted was not the technology. It was the flag it flew under. These inventions did not vanish. They put on new uniforms. And they are pointed at the world right now.